Hello everyone, welcome back. In today's video, we've got a couple of things to discuss as we continue on with our season preview series. Today we're talking about two Metropolitan Division teams in the Washington Capitals and the Philadelphia Flyers. How they do in the 2022-2023 season, how they do in the 2023 offseason, and how they're shaping up heading into the 2023-2024 season. We'll go to all of that coming up right now. Hello everyone, welcome back to another video here at the Edmundson and Pacioretty channel. Now, as usual, I'm going to kick things off today by discussing the season preview series. We continue on here today, this time talking about two Metropolitan Division teams. We talked about the Canes and Rangers. We also talked about the Devils and Islanders. Today we're talking about the Capitals and the Philadelphia Flyers. We're going to be seeing how they did in the 2022-2023 season, how they finished, how they did in the 2022-23 season. We're going to go over their offseason losses and additions. We're going to go over their top 3 picks in the 2023 draft. We're going to go over my current projected lineup for the 2023-2024 season. I'll also give you my projected point total for the 2023-24 season for these two teams, as well as my offseason grade, my opinion on how well these two teams did this offseason. So we're going to first start here with the Washington Capitals. The Capitals were a team who were hovering around the playoff mark for pretty much the entire season. They wound up being a few points out of a playoff spot come trade deadline time, which led them to trade a lot of their pending UFAs, and that really did lead them to start dropping after the trade line. They wound up finishing this season with a below-average record of 35, 37, and 10 for 80 points, 6th in the Metro Division, 13th in the Eastern Conference, 12 points back of the Panthers for the final spot in the East. Definitely. To me, it was not any surprise that the Capitals finished this bad. Before the season started, I projected them to have around a 500-point total. That's exactly what happened for them. I know there are some people who probably thought they could probably make the playoffs, but in my opinion, they had injuries to start the season, they were an aging veteran team, and on top of all of that, they are in an extremely competitive Metropolitan Division. So in my eyes, it was not overly surprising to see the Capitals' playoff streak end. And in my eyes, I thought that was probably something that could have easily been coming. So definitely going to be interesting to see how the Capitals do this year. So a really bad finish to the season. I think they had like a really bad losing streak after the trade deadline, and they finished with a really poor record after the trade line, which is why they finished so low. They were a bottom 10 team, so they had a top 10 draft selection this year, which is something we don't usually see from the Capitals. So definitely, it was not a fantastic year from the Caps. But definitely, I think they went into this offseason looking to see exactly how they can improve this team and be a little bit more competitive for next year. And I think they did all right in some aspects, but not overly great in some other ones. So as you can see here with their losses and additions, the losses do outweigh the additions a little bit. If you look at their losses, they lose Connor Brown, who signs as a free agent in Edmonton. They lose Craig Smith, who signs as a free agent in Dallas. They lose Carl Hagelin, who retired this offseason. They lose Connor Sherry, who signs as a free agent in Tampa. They lose Matt Irwin, who signs as a free agent in Vancouver. They lose Gabriel Carlson, who's still UFA. And then they also lose Zachary Fucale, who's also a UFA. The additions, they add Max Pacioretty in free agency. They add Matthew Phillips in free agency on the forward group. And then they add Joel Edmundson in a trade with the Montreal Canadiens as a defenseman. And they add Chase Prisky, who's a decent depth defenseman, AHL defenseman, also to the defensive end in free agency. So, in my eyes, not a fantastic offseason. The defense, I think, got a little bit better. They got Sandin at the trade deadline last year, which was probably their one big addition, and he looked like he fit in really well. They extended guys like Nick Jensen and Trevor Van Riemsdyk. They still have John Carlson. Yeah, Trevor Van Riemsdyk to that mix. You still have goaltenders like Kemper and Lindgren. They're going to be a decent defensively structured team, in my opinion. I think they'll be a decent defensive team. They also got a new coach in the offseason in Spencer Carberry. So hopefully, in my opinion, that could be a little bit more defensively structured, and I think they could be really good. But the forward group did not do overly well. They lost Connor Brown early in the season to a season-ending injury, so he wasn't a huge piece of that team last year. But definitely, losing him was not going to be great. I think he could definitely be a guy who puts up 40, 50 points. So losing him's not fantastic. I lose Craig Smith, who came over in a deadline deal, who's a decent bottom 6 forward. Carl Hagelin, I don't even think played last year. He's been injured for a while now, so losing him's not fantastic, but it's not really that bad. And then they also lose Connor Sherry, who was actually a really good middle 6 forward last year. In return, they add Max Pacioretty, but there's a lot of talk that Pacioretty won't be ready for the first couple of weeks, maybe first month of the season. So There's going to be a lot of speculation to see how Pacioretty does. Remember, he missed most of last year for the Carolina Hurricanes due to a couple of Achilles injuries, so he's still recovering from that. Matthew Phillips is a decent bottom six forward, in my opinion, and could definitely easily make the roster, but I'm not exactly sure that Phillips' addition is really going to offset all of the losses they had. So a decent offseason, in my opinion. They add guys like Pacioretty, who I think in time should definitely be a good top six forward for them. They add Matthew Phillips, who's a good bottom six forward. Edmundson's a good defenseman, so they do add a couple of pieces here, but I think they did lose a couple of key forwards and guys like Brown, Smith, and Sherry. Looking at their top 3 picks in the 2023 draft, they had their own pick, number 8th overall, in the first round, and they selected Ryan Leonard, a good power forward who's playing over in college right now, who I think is going to be a fantastic top 6 addition long term for the Capitals. They also had with their 8th pick in the second round, Andrew Cristal, who I think was a guy who fell a lot, a good player playing in juniors right now who could easily be a good middle 6 forward in time. And in the 4th round, once again, their 8th overall pick, the Washington Capitals selected Patrick Thomas, who's a decent, maybe third-line center in the future. So some pretty good, decent draft capital there. I think the Caps did fantastic with their draft capital. They had a little bit more than usual, and they picked up guys like Cristal and Leonard with their first 2 picks, which I think were fantastic additions. So in my eyes, the Capitals had a fantastic draft, in my opinion. Going over to my projected lineup for the 2023-2024 season for the Capitals, my current projected lineup, as you can see here, I have Alex Ovechkin starting the season on the top line with Dylan Strome and Tom Wilson. I have the second line being Connor McMichael with Nick Backstrom and Anthony Mantha. I have Sonny Milano playing on the third line with Evgeny Kuznetsov and TJ Oshie. And on the fourth line, I have Matthew Phillips playing with Nick Dowd and Abul Kubel. So a decent forward group there. The defense, I have Martin Fehérváry playing with John Carlson. I have Rasmus Sandin playing with Nick Jensen. And I have Trevor Van Riemsdyk playing with Joel Edmundson. So, like I said, a fantastic defensive core. Darcy Kemper is probably going to be the 1A starter goaltender. Lindgren's probably going to be the 1B backup goaltender. And then you have Joel Snively and you have Alexander Alexiev as your 2 spares. They have Max Pacioretty to start on long-term injury reserve. If he is out for the first couple of weeks, maybe months, I think there's a possibility Pacioretty goes on long-term injury reserve. And then they would have enough space for this roster to be cap compliant. So, in my eyes, they would have a fantastic thing. I think guys like Connor McMichael and Hendrix Lapierre need to start taking steps forward this year for the Capitals. I'm not sure Lapierre makes the NHL roster, but I definitely think there's a possibility McMichael does. I also think there's a good chance that Matthew Phillips makes the NHL roster. So, I think there's a good chance that there's a couple of good players there that make the roster. Like I said, defense looks pretty good. I think this team will be alright, but I'm not sure they'll be a fantastic team this year. So that leads me into the 2023-2024 current projected point total for this Washington Capitals team, and I don't have them doing overly fantastic. I have the Caps finishing with a record of 37, 36, and 9, so it is over 500, but that's only 83 points. That's still 7th in the Metro, according to my projections. That's still 14th in the Eastern Conference, and that's only 3 more points than they had last year. So I have them finishing right around 500, just like they did last year, maybe a little bit better than last year, but I still don't see them being a fantastic team to make the playoffs. With powerhouses like the Devils and the Canes in that team, the playoff teams most likely with the Rangers and the Penguins. You also have teams like Columbus I think is going to do a lot better. I think the Islanders are still going to be hanging around there. I don't think the Capitals can really jump many of those teams. So, in my eyes, I think the Caps probably do finish a lot lower than some people expect, and I think they will be one of the bottom-dwelling teams again this year. So, going to be interesting to see, but I see the Caps not doing fantastic this year. My offseason grade for them is a B-. Once again, not a fantastic offseason by any means, but they added Andrew Cristal and they added Ryan Leonard in the draft. I think they had a fantastic draft. They add guys like Max Pacioretty, who I think in time will be a good top 6 forward. They have Phillips and Edmundson. They add some decent players. I think Edmundson's a lot better of an upgrade on Matt Irwin. Phillips, Pacioretty, if they can both be good, maybe bottom 6 forward Phillips, top 6 forward Pacioretty, I think I should be able to replace production from guys like Connor Sherry and Craig Smith and Connor Brown. So, in my eyes, I think they had a pretty decent offseason. I don't think they had a fantastic offseason by any means, but I think they had a decent offseason. They're well positioned. I think they're probably not going to do very well this year, but I think there's still a really good chance they can still be a competitive team in the not-too-distant future. But I think with the way that this schedule is structured right now, I can't see the Capitals doing fantastic. So, in my eyes, Capitals have B- offseason, but I still think they're going to finish with 83 points and out of a playoff spot. Going over to the other team that we're going to discuss here today in the Philadelphia Flyers. The Flyers were not a fantastic team last year. I think a lot of people thought they would be a bomb dweller in the Metro Division, the Eastern Conference, the entire league, and they were. I think they finished a little bit better than some people might have expected. They had some injuries last year. Their team was not overly fantastic. They finished with a 31-38-13 record for 75 points. 7th in the Metropolitan Division, 14th in the Eastern Conference, 17 points back of the Panthers for the last wildcard spots in the Eastern Conference. So, not fantastic news for the Flyers last year. Definitely were a low-end team. They finished third lowest in the Eastern Conference. They had a bottom 10 draft selection, number 7th overall. So, them and the Capitals were really, really close to each other. And I think losing guys like Couturier and Atkinson to injury really hurt them. I think not having an overly great team was not fantastic for the Flyers. And I think everything was set for them to probably be a bottom 10 team last year. And I think everything's set up to probably be a bottom 10 team again this year. So if you look at their team and how they did in the offseason, here's their additions and subtractions from the offseason. If you look at their losses, not fantastic. They did lose quite a few players. They lost James Van Riemsdyk in free agency to Boston. They lost Kevin Hayes to the St. Louis Blues in a trade. They lose Kiefer Bellows and Jackson Cates, who have signed PTOs up to this point. They lose Brendan Lemieux, who goes to sign in Carolina. They lose Ivan Provorov, who signed with the Columbus Blue Jackets. They lose Justin Braun, who retired this offseason. And they lose Kevin Connaughton, who was also traded in that Provorov deal to the LA Kings. In exchange, if you look at their additions, they had forwards Ryan Poehling and Garnet Hathaway in free agency. They also had Mark Stahl in free agency, as well as Victor Mete. And then they acquired Sean Walker and prospect Helgi Grans in the Provorov deal, as well as goaltender Cal Peterson. So not a fantastic amount of additions and subtractions. The subtractions, I think, do outweigh the additions. The forward group, they lose James Van Riemsdyk, they lose Kevin Hayes, they lose depth guys like Bellows and Lemieux. They add Poehling and Hathaway, who are good fourth-line forwards, but they're not much more than that. Hathaway is a decent fourth-line forward. I could definitely see a hard-hitting fourth line of Hathaway, Poehling, and Delorier this year for the Flyers, which I think is a fantastic fourth line. But it won't help them a lot offensively. So losing Hayes, losing James Van Riemsdyk, that's losing a lot of offense on that team. The defense does get a little bit worse. You lose Provorov, who's a good top four defenseman. You also buy out Tony DeAngelo. He was another offseason loss that they had. They bought out Tony DeAngelo. He signed with Carolina. It's not a fantastic move, in my opinion, not to be able to get anything for DeAngelo, but they lose him. They lose Provorov. Two really big pieces of that top four last year. Those two are gone. You add Stahl. You add Walker. Not fantastic additions, in my opinion. So, Stahl and Walker are decent third pair defensemen, but they're not going to replace Provorov and DeAngelo. So, in my eyes, the defense looks a little bit worse. The forward group looks a little bit worse. They got Cal Peterson, who's probably going to either be the backup or third stringer. He did not have a really good year last year. Their goaltending looks a tiny bit worse as well. In my eyes, the Flyers probably got worse this offseason. Looking at their top 3 picks in the 2023 draft, they added Matvei Michkov in the first round, number 7th overall, and there's been a lot of controversy around Michkov being selected, and since he's been starting in the KHL, there's also been a lot of controversy, but definitely, I think long-term, if he can develop right, and he still is a really good player when he comes over from Russia in a couple of years' time, that's going to be a really good pick in my opinion. They also, with the 22nd pick in the first round, they selected Oliver Bonk, who's a really good right-shot defenseman. And then, with the 19th overall pick in the second round, they selected goalie Carsten Bjarnson, who I think in time could definitely be possibly at least a tandem goaltender, if not the goalie of the future for the Philadelphia Flyers. So, some pretty good additions there for the Flyers at the draft. I think they had a lot of draft capital, and they hit on with a lot of them. So, some pretty good draft capital there for the Flyers, and they made the most of it, in my opinion, and had a really good draft. If you look at the Flyers 2023-2024 current projected lineup, according to me, my projected lineup for this team, I have Travis Konechny playing on the top line with Sean Couturier and Owen Tippett. I have Atkinson playing on the second line with Morgan Frost and Yoel Farabee. I have Lawton playing on the third line with Noah Cates and Bobby Brink. And on the fourth line, like I said before, I have Delorier playing with Paling and Hathaway. On the defensive end, I have Sanheim and Ristolainen being the top pair. I have Mark Stahl playing with Cam York on the second pair. And I have Igor Zaniel playing with Sean Walker on the third pair. I have Hart being the 1A. At this point in time, I have Peterson being the 1B. And then I have Allison, Forrester, Steeler being the 3 spare. And I have Philadelphia Flyers defenseman Ryan Ellis, who seems to be done his career right now with injuries, starting on long-term injury reserve. And with that sort of a lineup, they would be a cap-compliant roster. So definitely, in my opinion, they look all right on paper, but they're not going to be a fantastic offseason. Couturier, Atkinson are coming off extremely long-term injuries, so you're going to have some rust in their games. The deep forward group, like I said, looks a little bit worse than last year. I think Brink stands a really good chance of making the roster. The defense looked completely worse than they did last year. In my eyes, you have Peterson, Sandstrom, and Urson, 3 really good goaltenders fighting for that backup role, in my opinion, behind Hart. I think there stands a good chance that one of Sandstrom or Urson winds up getting that role instead of Peterson, but in my eyes, for the time being, I think Peterson has the backup role for Philadelphia. So in my eyes, this team does not look a lot better than they did last year. So my current 2023-2024 projected point total for the Philadelphia Flyers, I have them finishing with a record of 24, 46, and 12 for 60 points. That's 8th in the Metro, 16th in the Eastern Conference. At this point in time, lowest in the league. I think the Flyers stand a really good chance to be the lowest in the league. 15 points less than last year. So I think the Flyers stand an extremely good chance to be one of the lowest teams in the league, if not the lowest. I know a lot of people think San Jose could easily be the lowest team this year. I think some people think Chicago could. I think some people think the Ducks could. Some people might even give a team like the Montreal Canadiens an outside chance to be the lowest team in the league this year. But in my eyes, I think the Philadelphia Flyers, with all their losses in the offseason, the way that defense is structured right now, the way that their goaltending was not fantastic last year, and I think got a little bit worse this year, I think one can make a strong case for Philadelphia being the lowest team in the NHL this year. At the very least, the bottom 3 team in the league, and maybe the lowest team in the Eastern Conference. So definitely, I think Philadelphia's not going to have a fantastic season this year. I give them a D+ for their offseason. They did well with their trades. I think they really did well in the Provorov deal. Besides that, though, they didn't really do much. They traded Kevin Hayes for a 6th-round pick. Their free agents additions were not really overly substantial. They lost a couple of key players. In my eyes, they didn't have a fantastic offseason. They definitely made well with that Provorov deal. They had a pretty productive draft. But besides that, their team didn't really benefit much this year. So in my eyes, I'm giving them a D+. And I think this team is still positioned at this point in time to miss the playoffs and be one of the lower teams in the NHL. So definitely, love to hear your thoughts down in the comments. Does Philly warrant a D+ rating? Does Washington warrant a B- rating? Do both these teams miss the playoffs in your opinion? Is Philly and Washington the bottom 2 teams in the Metro Division this year? Or do you think there's possibly a team who could finish lower than one of these 2 teams? Or do you think maybe Philadelphia takes a couple of steps forward, does a little bit better than last year? Does Washington get a lot closer than I think, in my opinion, to a playoff spot? Definitely, love to hear your thoughts down in the comments. But that's all I'm going to talk about for today. Remember to like this video, and if you really liked it, remember to subscribe down below. I also do a blog talking about news, rumors, analysis, stuff like that, so definitely check that out. I have links down in the description below, and I can't wait to see you guys all for the next video. See you guys soon.